Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gerardo Poli.
And this, sorry. Okay.
One of the best bits of advice I've ever received was to find good mentors and to learn from them. Trusted people who have already done what you're trying to do now. I've been fortunate throughout my career to have some fantastic mentors to help guide me, but I realized that they'd be hard to find and also hard to commit the time to one. This is why we've gathered some of the best minds from the veterinary world and squeezed them for their wisdom so that you don't have to learn the hard way.
With the help of our guests, we flip the veterinary profession on its back and explore its soft underbelly to find the tips, tools, and inspiration that you'll need to build the career that you've always wanted.
I'm Gerardo Poli.
I'm Hubert Hemstra, and this is the Vet Vault. Since starting the podcast, we've had some amazing feedback from some of our listeners. I love hearing about how other people are inspired by our guests. But one question that pops up time and time again is some variation of, I don't feel like I can focus on my career because I have young kids. And I totally agree. I often feel torn apart in the tug of war between career and parenting. So here at the Vet Vault, we've made it one of our missions to speak to vets who are finding ways to create fulfilling careers while still being engaged parents and husbands or wives, and to ask them how the hell they do it. When we started asking around for some guest ideas of people who seem to have solved this problem, our guest for today was one of the first names that popped up. Dr. Abbie Tipler is a small animal surgeon. She graduated from Massey University in New Zealand in 2005 and soon after graduation discovered her passion for small animal surgery. This took her to London, where she worked for several years in a combined general practice / orthopedic referral practice. In 2011, she moved to Sydney and sat her membership exams in small animal surgery, and in 2016 was elected as the head examiner for memberships in the small animal surgery for the ANZCVS. In 2017, she founded the Small Animal Surgery Discussion page for Worldwide Surgery Discussion, which has over 6,500 veterinary members. In 2018, she was the recipient of the ANZCVS Travel Grant for services to the surgery chapter. She's been actively involved in charities such as Pets in the Park, Elephants, Rhinos People, Greyhound Rescue and Cantoo. Currently, she is a second-year surgical resident at Veterinary Specialist Services. She lives in Saint Lucia with a husband and 2 young children. Join us as we find out from Abbie how she managed to create a rewarding career despite the commitments of raising a young family. She tells us about her journey into residency in what is a very competitive environment, how not to limit yourself based on others' expectations of you, how to go from a nervous surgeon to a total surgical boss, and much, much more. Please enjoy Dr. Abbie Tipler. Dr. Abbie Tipler, very welcome to the Vet Vault. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys.
Just to clarify for myself, Abbie, you and Gerardo, you know each other through work as well, is that correct?
Yes. So I'm with Veterinary Specialist Services during the day, and Gerardo is with the emergency team, Animal Emergency Services overnight.
Okay.
So he does the hard work in the middle of the night.
I think you guys do the hard work. We just rock up and sleep at night. That's what happens. And just get woken up when a GDV comes through the door. No.
Yeah, exactly. No, but you do a good job of those. So
you like the fairies who come in and fix the mistakes that Gerardo makes at night. You come and
pretty much. I didn't want to say that, especially since you're recording us and stuff. But yeah, it's good.
It's like, why did they do that? Like, Gerardo wanted to try something different over the weekend.
So just to clarify for the audience, Abbie, you're a surgeon. Last time I checked, you were doing a residency, or have you finished a residency? Are you specialized?
No, I'm in the trenches. I'm about halfway through, so 18 months through. So yeah.
And how's that going?
Just past the halfway mark. So that's I've got less to go than what I've done. So
that's That's a good way
Is
to
it
look.
like a halfway dinner? Like every vet school has like a halfway dinner where they all get kind of
No,
annihilated.
there was no halfway dinner, prize, anything. So, but I did reward myself. I went on a shopping trip and bought myself some new scrubs and whatnot. So I celebrated with me, myself, and I. But yeah, so that was good. But yeah, no.
It's a little bit sad if your celebration is new scrubs.
Well, they could be high
No,
up on the list, right?
it could be a new pair of pajamas, which is what I'm in now. But and I mean that's pretty much my life: pajamas and scrubs. But
I'm going to jump straight in. Tell us about your journey from vet student to, well, start at vet student, and then just a rundown of how your career has run to get you to the point of specializing in surgery.
yeah, sure. So I started at well, I was a student at Massey University, which is in New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, across the ditch. And yeah, Massey was good. There's a lot of sheep in New Zealand, but so I wasn't good at. I wasn't really a farmy type girl, so I sort of stood out at vet school for that reason. But so I graduated in about 2005 from Massey, and so I didn't stay long in New Zealand really. I was there probably for about 18 months, and then just in general practice there. And then I went over to the UK to do the sort of the overseas experience, like I guess a lot of vets do.
Mm-hmm.
And that was great. I'd locumed for a little bit, but wasn't a great fan of locuming. So I ended up at a general practice that was also an orthopedic referral practice. So, and I stayed there for about sort of 3.5 years. And I guess that's where I developed my interest in orthopedics.
Were you in the city? Were you in London, or where were you based?
Yeah, so I was in Wimbledon.
Aha.
Do you know Wimbledon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Where all the
Yeah,
South Africans and Australians are.
exactly. So, and I'm married to a South African, so
Oh,
I don't
you
know.
really?
Yeah.
Oh, so are we allowed? Are we
Yeah.
allowed to mention rugby? How does that work in the household
I
during this
know, it's
time of the year?
interesting. Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, but I don't know if I want to talk about it right at the very moment in time. But yeah, it was a bit disappointing. But yeah, anyway, moving on from rugby. Yeah, so yeah, no, but Wimbledon was it was a lovely place to live actually,
Mhm.
and we went to the tennis a few times. One of our clients was a tennis player, and don't ask me what her name was, but she was quite famous at the time, and she used to bring her animals over when she came over from the US. So we'd always get free tickets to Wimbledon, which was great.
Mm.
And yeah, so that was good. And I really enjoyed sort of working in London, I guess, as everyone does. You can sort of travel over to Europe whenever you want and have a weekend in Paris or whatever takes your fancy. So yeah, it was a really good time, and I was just very lucky that I found this practice, and we did a lot of orthopedics. So we didn't do spines, but we did a lot of other orthopedic procedures. So my boss at the time was very generous with his teaching and allowed me to do a lot of the surgeries. So when I came back to Australia, I had a few procedures that I was fairly comfortable with, that I could sort of bring to the general practices that I worked at. So that was useful experience that I got there.
But you're talking like simple fracture repair or like plating and maybe cruciates and things like that kind of stuff.
Yeah, lots of cruciates. Sort of, I would say like the bulk of our practice was cruciates, patellas, and fractures. Probably we sort of went through various techniques, as I guess you do with the cruciates, and everything has its period of being in favour, or not just that, but the evidence changes. So you modify your technique. And when I was in London, we went to the Arthrex tightrope workshop with Jimmy Cook, and it was sort of when that procedure was first introduced, and we were doing tightropes for quite a while, and then we switched to TTAs, and I mean now I'm doing TPLOs. There seems to be the most evidence available to suggest that, you know, TPLOs. But anyway, we don't want to get too in the depths of cruciate ligament disease.
Can you describe the technique of a TPLO for our listeners out there, and then half of them will fall asleep?
Exactly. I realised I was about to ramble on about cruciates. I was like, stop myself now.
So you came back, and then you started to do sort of like general practice, and then you were doing sort of maybe like advanced orthopedics for a general practitioner in general practice. But is that back in Brisbane, or did you?
Yeah, so we moved from London to Sydney, and I worked initially for a practice, Great Western Animal Hospital, which was sort of in the western suburbs of Sydney. And that was, well, actually, first of all, so when I first came back to Australia, I set my memberships in small animal surgery. That was the first joyous thing that I did when I got off the planes. Then I worked in Sydney, really nice general practice in Sydney. I worked there for a few years, and then I had the kids, basically. I mean, it was interesting working in Mossman. It was a very high socioeconomic area. So all of our clients, I mean, similar, I guess, to working in Wimbledon and London, but you know, a lot of very wealthy clients. One of our clients owned Hamilton Island, so it was that kind of, you know, amazing sort of wealth, and you know, it was interesting. There was some interesting times.
So how old are the kids now? Just to put things in perspective.
Yeah, the kids. Yeah, so the kids are now 5.5 and 4. So I went on maternity leave with my son Ashton for about almost a year probably, and then I went back to Mossman Vets, and we had a property in Sydney, but it was an apartment, and we were, you know, desperate for a house, especially when I was pregnant with the second. So we started to, you know, the Sydney market for housing is just insane, as you guys probably would have heard. So we had no family ties or any real ties to Sydney. You know, we were a little bit flexible in where we could work. So we initially bought a property that was going to be an investment property in Brisbane. But anyway, to cut a long story short, we ended up moving to Brisbane. So here we are.
Nice. And then started, when did you start your residency? Where in that time frame after moving to Brisbane did you make the decision to start specialising?
Yeah, so we moved to Brisbane about 2 weeks before I had Maddie, my second, and that was fun. And then I took another period of maternity leave, and then for about 8 months, and then I decided to go back into general practice, and I was probably practicing for about a year. I had a really, really lovely practice actually in Brisbane. I really, really enjoyed it. But as always, I was spending a lot of time at the specialist hospital, as I did in Sydney. I was always hanging out at the specialist hospitals, just scrubbing in and learning as much as I could. And so I was doing the same with Veterinary Specialist Services, just to learn and, you know, just make sure that I was doing everything that I could. And I was just very fortunate, I think, just to be in the right place at the right time. And I'd sort of built a bit of a relationship with Veterinary Specialist Services guys, and they offered me a residency. So I went home that night and spoke to my husband and said, well, what do you think about this? Because I might not be home quite as much. And he gave me his full support. So I accepted.
Wow.
It's a brave move.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really, was it on your radar at all or something? Or you were, you know, happy with the level of exposure you were getting through spending time in the specialist service and then being able to, you know, perform those things in your general practice? Like, was specialty on your radar, or?
Look, I to be completely honest, I always just put it in not the too hard basket, as in the too hard, you know, too hard work, but I never thought it was something that I would ever be offered, if you know what I mean. Like I just never thought that I'd be a candidate. When we came out of vet school, we were told that you'd only get an internship or a residency if your grades were amazing, and you know, you had to be this, this, and this. And one of the interesting things is maybe only one person said that to me, and but you believe it. You sort of say to
Mm.
yourself, oh, okay, well, it must just be too hard and I must just not be good enough. So it really, I can honestly say that I didn't really think that I could ever really do it. And I think when you're planning to have children, it's hard to get into that career mindset, because you're sort of planning for your family, and it's very difficult, I think, to be able to see beyond having children when you're a woman, because it's impossible you just can't predict what life's going to be like with children, and you don't know how you're going to feel, and I think you just can't sort of map out your career path in your mind, or maybe you can, but I found it difficult to anyway. So, but once I'd had the children and I started to get back involved, I mean, I was always involved with, when I was on maternity leave, it was a classic, because I found it hard being at home with the children. So I would get involved in all sorts of different things. So I examined for surgery memberships, and I joined the surgical chapter committee, and so I was doing all sorts of things. So I was very involved in the sort of surgery world, let's say. And then once the kids were just a little bit older, I started to think, well, what's my next step? Because I guess as you do at some stage in your career, you think, well, what am I going to do now? And I guess ultimately the options were to either specialise or buy into a general practice. Those were the sort of two options that I saw. But of course, when the residency was offered to me, I was just so grateful for the opportunity, and I think I was just extremely lucky. Residencies are highly sought after. I don't know if I even realised that at the time. I'd never applied for a residency. I'd never applied for internships. I think, like I say, it was just timing and good luck that I sort of got that offer. So. And of course now I'm really grateful for it, because I really enjoy it. I really love surgery, and it's really, I guess that was my concern with buying into a practice, was that it's a lot of management stuff. It's not just surgery, let's put it that way. So, and that was really the only thing that I really enjoyed. So so at least, the good thing is that I get to really focus on that and hopefully get good at one thing. So
I want to say, you say it was just timing and good luck. Surely there's got to be more to it than that. But,
I was about to say,
there's and it's a tricky one for you to answer without saying, well, it's because I'm so fantastic, obviously. but what do you think what are the reasons that because they are sought after, they are hard to get. You may have been there at the right time, but if you weren't the right candidate, they weren't just going to say, oh, I'll just give it to that girl because she tends to hang around here a lot.
Well, you never know. I was there quite a bit.
Well,
I think they were like, oh, we're never going to get rid of her. Sorry.
We may as well just. Were there things you think that you did, or things about you that you think, especially being into the program now and knowing what the program requires, that made you the right candidate? In other words, if you had to give advice for somebody looking for a residency, how do you go about it?
Yeah, gosh. And, it's such an interesting one, because since I've started the residency, it's actually a really common question, how do I get a residency? And look, I guess I was, I did do a lot of other extracurriculars, if it's within your profession, I don't know, but I was kind of involved, I guess. So, I was part of the surgery chapter committee. I'd examined for memberships. I think they could see that I was maybe the type of person who was really genuinely interested. I don't know. I can only guess. I think just being there, going there frequently, and I can only guess that helped as well. And I think also, I know in fact that they do really value vets who have spent some time out in general practice, because at the end of the day, we are communicating a lot with general practitioners who are answering their questions, we're helping them with cases. And if you haven't worked in general practice, I think, it's really hard to be able to really relate to what it's like and what sorts of challenges that they have. And I think it's really important. And I think it's really valuable as well to just have a lot of experience kind of, communicating to clients. And It's interesting because when I went over to UC Davis for my externship, they have a very different system over in America where you basically come out of vet school, and you're a little bit older when you come out of vet school because you've done a science degree and then you've gone into vet. But you basically, you come out of vet school, you do your internship, and then you apply for residencies. And I feel like there was a lot of challenges that they faced that maybe you how do I word this, that you may not face if you've had a lot of time in general practice. And I think by that, what I mean is, you're used to communicating with clients, so you don't have that whole added new sort of fresh challenge of having to navigate the sort of client side of things. So I found that was an advantage of having some experience. And I think also you really know what you're interested in, exactly what you want to do. I'd been in practice for many, many years. I'd developed a strong interest in surgery. I knew that wasn't going to change. I wasn't going to suddenly do a surgical residency and then say, oh gosh, I don't actually, this isn't really something that I enjoy. So I was, lucky to sort of have that certainty in my path and what I felt were my strengths. I think probably, those things factored in. So, but look, I also think it probably depends a little bit on the residency as well. So some residencies I think are probably more suited to someone who's just come straight from university, or maybe someone who's done a couple of internships and has published papers and all those sorts of things. I think the residency has to match the candidate as well. So I don't think there's a one size fits all necessarily either, which makes it hard to advise people who say, I really want a residency, what should I do? And my advice to them is just to get involved as much as you can, join journal clubs, set your memberships in surgery, get involved in some research. Go to as many conferences as you can. That was another thing that I did heaps and heaps of. I was always at the conferences, I guess, always speaking to specialists, just being in that community. So I think that must have helped.
The two things that came to mind when you were sort of talking beforehand, because I was going to ask the same question that Hubert did. And I had down there like relationships, question mark, and demonstration of value. Like you contributed greatly to the surgery chapter, and through your contributions they could see that you were committed, and that you were able to build professional relationships, which I can see is incredibly important as being a specialist. It's not just how smart you are and what kind of research you do and an interest in it. It's actually, as you said, it comes down to having those conversations, that experience in the consult room, experiences in terms of in general with regards to being a veterinarian. And I can see how that all rolled together and how it made you a prime candidate. I don't think it was luck. I think actually there was a whole lot of work in the background that maybe have not really came to light until you kind of talk through it that way. But I think that you demonstrate through. Well, you were one of the founding members of the small animal surgery discussion page, weren't you?
Yeah, so that actually I was the founder of that. So
wow. That took a lot of balls to open up
Yeah, well, it was interesting because I was at Science Week, and I was so I just examined for surgery, and I was in a surgical chapter meeting, and they were sort of talking about social media, and then it was maybe a couple of weeks later, and I had a colleague of mine from general practice in New Zealand, out in rural general practice, who sent me a message asking a surgical question, because I guess sort of amongst my vet class it was known that I'd gone off and done a bit of extra training on the surgery side. So I'd often get these questions and I'd help as much as I could. But quite often I'd then turn to one of my specialist friends, whoever it was at the time, and I'd say, well, what do you think about this? And it was kind of this middleman thing. And I just thought, well, what would be great is if we could start a group that could help vets who don't have access to, necessarily a local specialist centre that they're in constant communication with, or, they're really stuck on a case and they don't feel that they can, or they might not be brave enough to ask, or something might have gone wrong and they might have wondered, oh gosh, should I really have been doing this? And there's all these sorts of things. And also new graduate, obviously that's a hugely challenging time when you come out as a new graduate, and there's just so many things about being a new graduate that are tough. I mean, it's worth it if you can battle through that time, but it's a tough time. And I just thought, if I can maybe get in touch with some new graduates and some rural vets, and I've got a bunch of specialist friends, so how about I start a Facebook page to answer surgery questions. So that's what I did, and it just spread. And now there's I think we've got almost 7,000 vets on there. So, yeah, it's one of the things that I am proud of. It's really nice to be able to see that a new graduate can come on and ask a question, and then you've got John Innes in the UK, or Andrew Marchescu from SASH, or Philip Moses from VSS coming and answering a question from a vet that's in not even necessarily Australia, but anywhere in the world, and can help them out with a problem. So I think
why has nobody told me about this page?
Because you're such a bad surgeon, bro. They don't want you to contribute onto the surgery page.
No. I don't want to contribute. I want to ask questions.
I don't want your lame questions, okay? Oh, that's an incredible achievement. I acknowledge you for actually creating a community, right? One of the hardest things to do, and what a lot of veterinarians feel, they feel isolated.
Well, that's
right?
exactly it.
What you've been able to create is community.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And I think, it can be so isolating, and a lot of practices are small. I think there's an increase in the number of smaller practices that are there, 1 and 2 man practices. And, I think it can be a real challenge when you've only got one person that you can ask about a case. But if you can post, the details or the x-rays, or, just any information, and say, hey, what do you guys think about this? Then I think that can be really helpful, and hopefully just kind of reduce the stress that, the clinician might be feeling about that case. That was my goal. In light of all the challenges that veterinarians can sometimes face. So
that is fantastic. Gerardo, are you asking questions, or?
Yeah, I've got some questions actually, but maybe not. Actually, one thing I want to ask is, and you can decide whether to answer this or not, but it's mainly around actually our previous podcast. So I'll answer it as a question, but I just want to let you know that you can decide if you want to answer it or not.
Okay, sure.
But we had a previous guest that was on, Justine Lee, so well known as Vet Girl on the Run.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And she mentioned actually one of the things that she suggests is, or well, I suppose if someone asked her I suppose advice is that you should have your children like young. So like have your children, and if you like, if it comes to family planning, don't necessarily delay your children for your career, because obviously it gets harder as you get older to have children. I don't know what your thoughts are on.
Oh gosh, I mean, I think that it's just got to be a decision that individual women make for their own life. I mean, I don't think there's a one size fits all. I mean, oh gosh, there's so many factors to that, Gerardo. I mean, I think if you can, oh gosh, I mean, I guess if you, if you're in a position where, you're, because look, I mean, I get, there's so many aspects to that, because you have to, I guess, in some ways be in a place in your life where you feel, happy and ready to have children. And if it's not the right timing for you, or, a lot of women obviously struggle to fall pregnant, so, that can delay things. So look, I don't know about the general sort of advice of saying to women you should have children early. I think it really depends. And I mean, I could have certainly done things the other way around, and maybe if I'd just had a bit more faith in myself and applied for residencies, or had been a bit more certain in my career path, I could have specialised and then had the children and then gone back to specialist practice. But as it turns out, I've done it the other way around. I think you can do either. So I mean, it's an interesting perspective. I don't know
I'm
that I
gonna
necessarily.
I'll rephrase the question,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
what she was saying, what she was alluding to is that many people feel that it's career or children.
Ah, okay.
And in her instance, she had career, focused a lot on career, and then had children. But she says, in retrospect, she should have just done career and children. Now, you
Ah,
are
sure.
by what you are doing. To me, it looks like that's what you're doing. You're going, never. It's not one or the other. I can have both. I can have
Mm.
family while focusing on my career.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
I think your actions answer the question. I want to know, how the hell do you do it?
Yeah,
I
okay,
think
yeah,
there's a lot of
sure,
people
sure.
out there who want to know that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think so how do you do both? Look, I think at the end of the day, you've someone has got to be able to look after the children if you're sort of actively pursuing a career, especially the way that I am at the moment. So,
Mm,
it's a full-time job. And in addition to that, there's study. I think it would be not impossible, and certainly women have actually done this, but I think it would be much more difficult if I didn't have support in doing that. So I'm lucky in that my husband is in IT and he's got a very flexible job. So he works long hours as well, but he can work from home. So, drop-offs and pickups, and we've managed to work it into the crazy hectic for sure,
mm,
but we've managed to work it into the routine. You're always faced, I guess, a little bit with the choice of career and time with your family, and
mm,
it was a discussion that we had, and for the next few years, I'm just not able to spend as much time with my kids, but take a year off for or almost a year for both of them for maternity leave. So I was there for
mm,
that sort of crucial, I guess, time when they were babies, and then I worked part time. And this is the fabulous thing about the veterinary career, is you can work part time. And I think, to be honest, I think you could do a residency part time as well. Um,
mm,
but I guess that's another conversation. But there's so many different ways, and I think the great thing is that things are really changing, and there are so many more opportunities for women in the way that things are done. That traditional, this is the way it must be done, that maybe was more suited to a man's career, is kind of it's not completely out the window, but it's changing a little bit to allow some flexibility so that women can pursue a career. And I think also the amazing thing is that my husband recognised that, by taking a lot of time off from my career, when the kids were little, he managed to develop his career. So we've taken turns, I
Mm.
guess. So I guess, probably it was 4 years that I was mainly at home with the
Mhm.
children. So now I'm doing a 3-year residency. I was mainly doing the children's stuff. So, there's been a little bit of a flip in the roles. And I mean, how fantastic is it that can happen? Because I really don't believe that used to be an option.
That's really cool.
I think that times are changing, and I think that's really great, because I found it an extreme, almost by far the most challenging time in my life was staying at home with the children. I just found that it was just this. I don't know. I just found it really difficult. Really, like in an you just love them to pieces, but I just found it really mind numbing.
oh
And
yeah,
my
oh
brain
yeah,
was used to being stimulated. I was used to being in communicating with people all the time, and then I found it just so different and so isolating,
yeah.
that it's great that I can now have a career. And if I had to stay at home with the kids for my whole life, as women used to have to do, then I think I would find that really hard.
I liked what you said there about
Totally.
how, the 4 years is when your partner focused on his career, and then, kind of it's time to swap it over in a sense now. Like, you don't have your time now. And if
Yeah,
situation permits, then, you know, have a conversation, and the conversations around, hey, this could be 3 years of of my time to build my career and stuff. You know, it's like, it kind of sounds like a reasonable kind of swap in a way. So
yeah.
What a cool thing that can happen for not just for the female point of view, just for men to be able to say, yeah, you know, it's okay. I'm sure in our parents' generation where that wasn't really an option, where heaps of dads would have said, yeah, I'd happily step back a little bit from the 9 to 5 and spend a bit more time with my kids. I certainly see that in my own life compared to how my dad had to be with us. I see so much more of them. So no, it is actually a great time, and veterinary science is a fantastic career in that regard, in that it allows so much more flexibility that you can kind of pick and choose when and where you want to work to some degree.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think it is it is a really, really flexible career in that respect. So, I mean, there's obviously challenges because there's the unpredictability of emergencies, and which is what it makes it exciting from an office job, but it can also make it challenging. But there's always ways that you can kind of problem solve these things, and we've sort of muddled through, and we've had to use the nannies occasionally for if Luke has to travel for a bit or something, and they might have to come and pick them up after school. But most of the time we've just sort of managed to fill the gaps somehow. So we've made it work.
Well done. I'm impressed. It's admirable. We as you say, it's a controlled chaos at the best of times.
It is
to undertake chaos, something massive like that really is quite something.
I got a question. You when you were talking about your time in the UK, and you said that you weren't a fan of locuming. Was there a particular kind of reason for why that was, or because a lot of people, consider, okay, I'm going to go locum in the UK, and like, was there something that about it that that you found was challenging or so forth, and something for these particular people who were thinking of doing that, give them a heads up around it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't know if it was just the practices that I happened to land myself in. They were small kind of practices. I've always right from graduating, I've always kind of gravitated towards practices with a lot of vets. There's a lot going on. There's sort of people with special interests. So I don't know. Even my first practice in New Zealand was sort of one of the only referral centres in the South Island of New Zealand. Wow. So, there was a lot of, just a lot going on. So I don't know if it was that, or, just a couple of practices that I just felt weren't, I guess there's varying standards, I guess. And I don't know. I just found it challenging. I also, I really like, I think maybe just my A-type perfectionist personality, it just didn't sort of suit that kind of randomness of not having a regular place to work. And I mean, what eventually happened was I did a locum at this practice in Wimbledon, and and I just really clicked, and I basically just stayed there for 3.5 years. So it was a no-brainer because we lived in Wimbledon, the practice was in Wimbledon. It was, we took orthopedic referrals. It all just sort of worked out. But yeah, I mean, I think locuming, what's fantastic about locuming, and maybe what I wish that I had done a bit more of, was go out into some of the more rural areas and sort of explored around the UK maybe a bit more. I mean, maybe that would have been, I was sort of trying to do it all in London, being based in Wimbledon, whereas a lot of locums offer accommodation, and so you can really travel around and see the UK whilst working. So I don't think it's anything necessarily negative about locuming, if that makes sense.
It is stressful. I did a bit of that. I'm a bit like you. I actually had this conversation with a recent graduate yesterday who was asking me about the idea of locuming in the UK. It's definitely stressful. Well, if you change inherently is a stressful thing, and it's change every couple of weeks, and not small changes. It's a whole new
Mm.
team, whole new system, whole new culture, and you have to show your value. And very often, well, not very often, but sometimes because you're the locum, you get all the they tend to pass you all the crappy stuff that nobody else wants to do.
Yeah.
So no, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I don't regret having done it for the traveling reasons that you said, and also met great people along the way. But I do know the night or two before the actual locum, I'd be in my little room in rural UK, almost in tears and in anxiety and loneliness about what's to come the
Yeah.
next day. And it always
Yeah.
works out fine, but it was certainly stressful. It's not I think you'll get used
It
to it the more you
is.
do it. But
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think it is a way of life that you need to get used to. And one of the interesting things. So one of the only complaints that I've ever had from a client, because and I really try, I guess, to keep clients happy as much as I possibly can, because I find that if you've got happy clients, then the job is just much less stressful. But one of the complaints that I had was, like, the actual complaint was irrelevant, but what happened in the consult, the dog came in and it had a sore leg, and I was really flustered because I'd arrived, I didn't know where anything was. It was, here's the consult room, no explanation of how to use the computer system. So you're fumbling away in front of the client, you don't know how to get into the system, and then you're half thinking about that whilst trying to ask the client questions. And then it was a simple lameness, and I said, oh well, we should put the dog on some meloxicam or whatever it was. And then I went out and they didn't have it and I couldn't find it. So I came back, and from the client's perspective, I mean, I can absolutely, I would have complained about myself. They must have just been thinking this vet has absolutely no idea what they're doing. But, I think it was just the fact that I didn't have any idea what I was doing, but not on the veterinary side, just on the logistics side. So, that's not what you want. You want your clients to be happy, and you want them to feel like you're doing a good job as well as doing a good job. So, yeah, locoming has its challenges, but also has huge advantages as well. So, I guess you take the good with the bad, like anything. But
what about your experience just in general of working in a different country? Is that something you'd recommend in principle? It certainly worked out well for you. Are there things that you think are particularly advantageous about doing that, and were there things that you think you learned through working in a different country that you would have missed out on if you just stayed put?
Yeah. Look, I think that in terms of small animal practice, it's actually surprisingly similar across. So I've worked in New Zealand, the UK and Australia, obviously, and I have visited a couple of general practices in South Africa. That's an interesting thing. So because practice in South Africa is very different. So but yeah, in the UK I think it is similar. So I don't know if necessarily from a career point of view, gosh, it's hard, because of course you're going to learn things from every practice that you work in. I don't know if, and I learned a lot when I was there, but I don't know if it was necessarily being in a different country, but just being in different practices. I mean, that's why we go and when you're doing your residency, you do a lot of you do your externship. So part of my externship was at UC Davis, and then I'll go over to the US and I'll do the other part of my externship, and I'm doing some TRD in a couple of weeks with SASH in their neurology department. So I mean, and you just learn so much from going to different places. But I think the advantage of practicing in the UK was really that you got to experience the different cultures from the travel, and I guess also the your client base, everywhere you work is has a different client base. And I think my time in Wimbledon, because my experience with working in different socioeconomic areas, is that your communication needs to be different, I guess. And so working in different practices and different areas can help you develop all of those sorts of skills as well. So certainly in terms of life skills and experience, it's valuable. As for clinical practice, it's still cats and dogs. It's slightly different things that they see, different breeds, but
lots more rabbits, hamsters, and chinchillas.
Yeah, I was never good at that. I was never good at that. The last bird that I saw died, and I was clipping its nails. In fact, I mean, its head just flopped to the side, and it was awful because there was a child in the room, and she started crying, and of course, I felt like I had to. You can't just suddenly announce, because when a bird dies, it's dead. There's just nothing you can do. So I couldn't just say, oh, sorry, it's dead. So I started to kind of do CPR, and it was just a nightmare. It was just, so after that, I just, I didn't see another bird. So I think the birds were just as pleased as I were about that. But you do see a lot of exotics. So people bring in all sorts of things, fish, and one of the important things about fish is that if you try to euthanize a fish in the tank and you miss the fish that you're trying to euthanize and you inject the letha bulb into the tank, all the fish die.
Oh.
So
I shouldn't laugh at that, but it's just like
that's a trick for young players. But yes, I moved on from exotics quite quickly. When I luckily, when I got back to Australia, there seemed to be, and in fact in the UK, I don't know where they all were, but in Australia they have exotics vets, it seems, in most of the major cities. So if someone calls with a bird, they really make it past reception.
Wow.
So that was good.
Funny when you say about fish. I used to have heaps of fish when I was going through uni, and so I have a reasonable amount of knowledge around fish husbandry and management of most common fish diseases. And a practice manager at work is really keen to try to promote me as some kind of fish vet. And I tell you what, I try to. They're one of the species that I really try to solve the owner's problems over the phone, right? Most of the times it's like, I'll bring your pet down, we'll have a check. But it's like, my fish has got this thing, and I'm like, explain it to me, and then I'll Google, white dots on fins, and it's like, does it look like this? Okay, this is what you need to do. It's like, I'll do a phone consult with you because I really don't know if I want to see your fish. So.
That's what you do when you see something that's so out of your realm of expertise. And I'll never forget when I saw an axolotl, which, have you guys ever seen one of those? It's like a walking fish.
My kids really want one, but they freak me out completely.
No. It was terrible. And it was gasping at the top of the water, and so I said to her, I'm just going to go do a bit of research, and I went out the back and did what any good vet would do, and I Googled it, and then while I was Googling it, it died. So, oh gosh, anyway, exotics are so fragile. I'm very, very glad that some vets are interested in exotics, let's put it that way.
My kid has a goldfish that's got a big tumor on its side, and I must admit I keep looking at it going, I think I can cut that.
I think you can do it.
Give it a crack.
There's not as much letha bulb in the water as what Abbie put. Okay.
Don't try that.
Gerardo, you've just ousted yourself as a fish vet. So guess who I'm going to phone for advice before I.
No, I had an owner call, and he had this like giant gourami, and giant gourami is. It's like this big, but like for people out there, it's probably about a 40 centimeter fish, and they sell for around about, I don't know, $1,500-2,000 in Australia because they take forever to get that big. This giant gourami came in, like it was going to come down because he had like a mass that was oozing or bleeding or something. The owner was like, finally, I just want it done. And he was like, oh, we're going to bring it down. And then on the phone, to the nurse, it's like, okay, it's coming down now. And And I was like, holy hell, give me a sec, really, come on. And then, so I was Googling, I had like an anesthetic regime set out. I and like kind of rigged some water to go around and would kind of pump water through its gills. And it's like, I had this all sorted. And then like a couple of nurses were like freaked out, and a couple of nurses were really keen, and they helped me out, kind of figure out sort of like pain relief plan and so forth. And then like we're all prepared, and I was like all psyched up, had my phone ready to take some photos, right? And then and it was one of my biggest achievements for the year, right? Chopping this thing off a giant gourami. And then he didn't come down, and we called him back, and he goes, "Oh no, I just decided that I'd probably just wait till tomorrow." It was like an hour of research.
No. Oh, that's.
But I felt really prepared now.
That's terrible.
I felt really prepared now.
Well, if another giant gourami or whatever it is comes in, you'll know exactly what to do.
Yeah.
Oh man. Oh,
I mean, I want to take you back to surgery, as specifically as a field. You had quite a nice, by the sounds of it, quite a good introduction into it. But it's a scary thing for a lot of people. It scares lots of vets, not just new grads. I know many experienced vets who are still scared by surgery.
Yeah.
And then I think part of the problem these days, makes me sound old when I say these days, but it is that because it is becoming so much more specialized that many vets actually struggle to get exposed or are scared to try something new because there is the specialist down the road who can definitely do a good job. How have you got any advice? How do you tackle surgery? How do you tame it? How do you get good at it without putting yourself or your patients at risk?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I think if you can, so if you really want to do surgery, as I did, I knew that that's exactly what I wanted to do. I think finding yourself as much as possible a practice where the other vets don't really want to do surgery. I mean that's and that's quite common. You've got vets who are really interested in medicine. I mean, I just worked fantastically with those vets because they would mainly tackle the medicine cases, and I would do the stitch ups and the spays. And I mean, that's there's so many surgical skills that you use for, I mean, even your desexing. It was so funny the other day. I had two procedures. I had over a hysterectomy on a dog with cystic ovaries, and I had a liver lobectomy, and I was really worried about the liver lobectomy. Well, I mean the over a hysterectomy was just 10 times harder, and it was just a nightmare one. It was a deep-chested dog, and it had these massive ovaries, and they had developed a huge friable blood supply. And I mean, so you don't necessarily have to do a fracture repair to be able to develop and really get good at surgery. So there's heaps of opportunity within general practice to do lots of surgery, and that's where I started. I just I'd be the one who would fight for the toe amputation, and a dog came in with a wound, and that was the consult that I wanted to see. So it was always if there was an emergency exploratory laparotomy, I was there. I was staying late. I was and that's the thing, is that it wasn't just I've always been a bit diehard surgery. And so even when I was in Sydney, I was on my day off going into the specialist hospitals, scrubbing in, so watching them do a lot of procedures. So, and eventually it's just amazing. You're doing the surgeries that you feel comfortable with in general practice, and then you're watching specialists do procedures, and then you watch, and then you eventually there's a transition between that and being able to do it, and it's sort of it just sort of happens, I guess. So I think finding the right practice, if you can find a practice where there's someone who's a bit more experienced and can teach you a few things. So I really tried when I was working especially at the practice that I was at in Brisbane, which I really, really loved. And there was a lot of new graduates coming through. I tried to sort of, give them tips, and on the weekends I'd have little surgery sort of workshops, and we might cover, basic wound management, or, exploratory laparotomy. So there's a helicopter flying over. And if you can find that, and also the other thing, is just your CPD. There's the most amazing surgery workshops where you can go and practice on cadavers, and so I did a load of that sort of stuff, and conferences, and it's such a combination, I think, of things. And if you're really interested, it will just be something that naturally develops. There's always the experience. The other thing is just going and doing some work, like, for example, at the RSPCA or Animal Welfare League, where referral just isn't an option. And you're it. And you still want to, feel like you're not doing the patient an injustice by sort of having a go, but you will get some more experience by doing that. And just really developing on your techniques. There's also a lot of videos as well. So, the resources that are available to vets now is, a great deal more than what we had. That's making me sound old now, isn't it? Back in the day when there was no internet.
But, back in the day when there was a textbook.
There's so many. Yeah, exactly. And you're out, sitting out with the textbook trying to fumble your way through. But, there's a lot more. And, most of your sort of specialist hospitals, I guess you have to have a local specialist hospital, but a lot of specialist hospitals are really glad to have general practitioners come and visit. We've got a lot that come and visit with us at VSS, and I think that's another way that you can develop on your skills. So, there's hundreds of ways, really. You don't necessarily need to. I think, don't be scared. Just there's loads of surgeries that you can do that will just come through the door every day if you're working in a busy general practice. So I think just finding the right practice and surrounding yourself with lots of support and education, and you'll get to where you want to be.
It sounds like a lot of it is just a decision as well to get good at surgery, because you might
be in that practice,
say all these things,
say no.
Yeah, exactly. You had the desire, you wanted to do it, and the way you tell it doesn't sound like it, but you've put in a lot of effort. It doesn't just happen. It is a decision and a concerted effort to say, I'm going to get good at this. I think so. I think, it's always going to be scary. It certainly was for me as a new graduate, tackling, even the most basic surgery. So, but, over time and with practice, just like anything, you develop skills, and then you develop on those skills, and and it's amazing when you're doing a residency as well, because when you start a residency, everything just goes out the window, and you realize how many kind of bad habits you've got yourself into, I guess, and then you just go right back to knowing or feeling at least like absolutely nothing. So there's always more to learn. I think that's the point. You can always get better, and I think that is one of the really cool things about the career as well, is that there's so many different paths that you can take, and so you can really pick something that you're interested in. It could be management or research or surgery or medicine or whatever it is, and you can develop on that. And I think we'll probably see more of that as time goes on as well. I think things will become more specialized, not even necessarily with specialists, but just within general practices as well. I really, really like general practices where people can kind of put their heads together and say, okay, well, I'm really interested in ophthalmology, and I'm really interested in developing my skills around lamenesses, so that you can get a little bit better at one area, because it's very, very difficult, as every general practitioner will be able to relate to, when you're seeing just so many different cases and different species every day, to really get good at one area. Relying on everyone's special skills within a practice, if you have a practice big enough, obviously, I think can be really useful as well. And I don't know if this is just a perception or is it just where I am. But you don't see a lot of female surgical specialists. Is that true? Is that the
Yeah,
reality?
it is true. Yeah, it is a reality. So that there are less females that become specialist surgeons, and it's interesting because I think that there's lots of different reasons for that, but I wonder whether or not some of it, at least, is that we're told, I guess, especially around things like orthopedics, that it's a man's thing, and even if it's not necessarily said, those exact words, I think there's this impression, or this, I don't know, there's this image that we get of a surgeon, or especially an orthopedic surgeon, being a man. And I mean, it is changing, but it's it hasn't necessarily, for some reason there's a lot more male surgeons. And is it that females aren't interested in surgery? I don't think that's probably true. Is it that we're told that we're not as good as surgeons, which actually isn't true, because there's been some research out of the US that has actually found that female surgeons have around a 4% lower risk of death in their patients. So I mean,
Really?
that's females. I don't know if that, I mean, sorry, that's humans. So I don't know if that translates to veterinary surgeons, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not that we're not. It was, yeah. So they were actually saying, well, what can the male surgeons do that's similar to the female surgeons, that they can improve on their outcomes, which I thought was
That's a really interesting study. That's awesome.
So we all have our people that we sort of find inspiring, and I follow a human surgeon called Nikki Stamp on Instagram, basically, and she has a hashtag which says "I look like a surgeon," and it's basically a hashtag that female surgeons can use, and they might be in the operating theatre or whatever, and hashtag "I look like a surgeon." The idea behind it is just to change that image that maybe people have of a surgeon, because I think it's difficult to be what you can't see, and we know that it's important for females to have role models and people who within the same gender that they can sort of aspire to be like, or whatever. So if those female role models don't exist, then is that one of the reasons why there's less female surgeons? So I mean, I don't know the answer, but I think it's an interesting thing to discuss. And if it's the females don't want to be surgeons, I think that's fine. But if it's that females have been told that they're not good enough, or that they just don't have that role model or that inspiration, then I think that can be really sad. And I definitely see it. I had a client actually just today, and she's the loveliest client in the world, and I was talking to her about the patella surgery that I had actually done on her dog, and then she called her daughter and said, "Now I'm just speaking to the nurse," and and I mean, I think all female, even just a lot of female professionals probably have stories like that. And
yeah. I think every single one of them that I've ever, absolutely, always have that.
Yeah, exactly. There's always a story, and I mean, I don't take offense. I mean, she was, she's really lovely, but it's just kind of, I think it's changing that perception and having the conversation, and also being really conscious. And I think, one of the things that I think is really good about Veterinary Specialist Services is that they have a representation of both genders in the surgery department, and I think that's something that other specialist hospitals can aspire to, because I think that just having that awareness of of having a balance between the genders. We know that there's differences, and that there needs to be representation from both genders, that's really important. So just being aware of that and having that conversation, I think, is really really important.
In my first job in South Africa, small rural practice, I worked with a female classmate who was an excellent vet, and we had a client who was who's not a lovely lady. She was quite a ball breaker, really, but and she booked her pets in for, I can't remember what for some surgery. I did the admit, and then she was very clear to me. She said, "You doing this, not the female vet." And the terrible irony is this client was a surgeon. She was a surgeon.
Oh,
And she, a human surgeon,
really?
but she still had that bias to say no, it has to be a male who's going to do the surgery, which was really, and the irony is she had two dogs. Oh, they both had horrendous umbilical hernias, and behind her back we each did one, and mine broke down. And so there you go.
Oh, classic. Yeah, well, that's just because females are better surgeons. That's what the evidence says.
Hashtag.
That's what the research says. Exactly. Gerardo, how are you going? What have you got to ask?
I'm actually, my questions were asked, but my major questions have been sort of addressed, and Hubert, what's your thoughts?
Okay. No, I'll ask you one out of personal interest. When I was Googling you, you've done quite a bit of writing. You've done quite a bit of blogs and educational writing, and you're quite busy on the internet. When do you do that? In between a residency and two children, when in the world do you get time to write?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, that's something that I quite enjoy. English was actually one of my best subjects, believe it or not, at high school. And yeah, I do. Yeah, so I enjoy writing, and I think I'm also one of those terrible people that if you ask me, will you do this, I will virtually always say yes. In fact, when I was offered the residency, Philip Moses, he sat me down and he said, right, now I need to talk to you about something. You are doing the residency now, and you've got a family, and what else are you going to do? And I started to talk, and he said, nothing. You're going to do nothing else. You're just going to do the residency and look after your family. And but before I started the residency, and I've mainly obeyed that rule. I have done a couple of sort of educational workshops and things, and obviously I still run the Facebook page, but I have tried to cut down on my extracurriculars. But yeah, I did used to really enjoy writing educational articles. And yeah, so I think some websites, I don't know how they even found me. I think they can smell out the person who's gonna say yes, and they probably called 100 vets before me, and then said, will you write about this? And I was like, yeah, I'd really love to do that. So yeah, so I ended up writing bits and pieces about things. So they're still floating around the internet. And I hope once I finish the residency, I hope I can get back involved with doing a few more things like that. But at the moment I'm
so they're on hold for the okay. Now that's what I wanted. I wanted to know. I just wanted to know how do you fit it all in? But you're not doing too much.
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment. Well, we have to write papers, so I still get to write.
You can't transform some of your blogs into papers or something. Merge a couple together.
Gosh, I wish.
I've got one more for you.
Yeah, sure.
Well, a couple more, but this one I just need Gerardo to hear. And we might make this a regular question, Gerardo. I don't know if Gerardo knows this, but when I prepare for the interviews, I ask the guests if they have any cool stories that I can work into the interview to and yours I can't quite work into the interview, so maybe we should just have a question and say, please tell us a bizarre story from practice. So please, just the one that you told me, I need to hear more, and the audience needs to hear about this one.
Okay, so actually this is a good way to end. So I call it the frozen dog story.
Okay.
So I was working. It was in Wellington, in New Zealand, actually, and one of our clients came in, and and his dog had been euthanized the day before, but he wanted to see her. And the nurses came and asked me if that would be okay, because obviously it's not a request that you get every day. So I sort of, I thought about it, and I said, well, I can't really see why we can't allow him to see his own dog. But it wasn't, she was in the freezer at the stage. So I thought, well, I better just go out and have a chat to him and just explain that. So I did that, and he said, oh, no, that's okay. So anyway, I went to get her, and, I apologized. I said, look, I'm really sorry, but she's been in the freezer, and she's, she's a bit frozen. So anyway, we get her out, and, her, you can just imagine she's absolutely,
I can imagine something
completely frozen.
Yes, we know.
So
we know.
Anyway, so he sort of, so anyway, I left him with the dog, and then a few minutes later, he's gone. And I said to the girls, where is he? And we were getting really worried at this stage that it was all a bit unusual. So anyway, we looked outside, and there he was, and he'd propped the dog up. He'd sort of squashed it up so that it looked like it was sitting in a sitting position, and he'd propped it up on the fence outside the practice. So this is like a fairly main road here, and he'd propped it up, and he was taking photos of it. And then he put it in the rose garden, and he took a few more photos. And we said to him, well, actually, I'd said to him before, can I ask if I'd like to see her? And he'd gone home, and he'd realised that he just didn't have
any photos.
He just didn't have enough photos. So he just decided to and take a few. So anyway, he so that was a bit weird.
But was it like somehow randomly, like, I don't know, positioned in a way that it looked like as if it was sitting or something? Or was it?
I mean, that's what
like
it
wasn't frozen.
Aimed for. Yeah, so he'd aimed to, to make it look like it was alive in the photos, so that it could be sort of looking back on the happy memories. But it just, I mean, maybe
you see that
photos
sometimes their lips are
alive,
different angles and things, and
well, I didn't want to say it, but I mean, when we got it out of the bag, its tongue was kind of drooped out, and it was sort of stuck to the side of its face. So, I mean,
as they do.
It looked very much dead to me, but I mean, maybe in the photos it looked okay, but I
Photoshop.
Well,
yeah,
exactly.
You could just photoshopped another dog in these photos.
Well, exactly. But actually, it's quite funny, because I was telling that story, and a couple of years later, to a non-veterinarian. It was a new girlfriend of one of our friends in Sydney, and she suddenly went quite pale. And of course, I'd had a couple of glasses of wine, and so it was. You start to accept, you really sort of kind of lay on the details about how it was, deformed in the freezer and all this kind of carry on. And she went sort of pale and left the room. And it was a couple of weeks later, and I said to my friend, I said, what happened? The girlfriend looked upset about the frozen dog story. And he said, oh yes. And I said, what is it? And he said, oh, well, I forgot that her dog had been euthanized just a couple of weeks before. And I said, I said, that's terrible. How could you tell? Because he'd said, Abbie, tell the frozen dog story. And I said, that's so insensitive. And he's like, and he said, but wait, it gets worse. And I'm like, what? And he's like, by you.
Oh no!
That's terrible.
I just felt so terrible. I know, like, can it get any worse? It can't. So
you recognize, and then you tell the frozen dog story. Oh God!
I know. Could you believe it? That was something that I won't forget in a hurry. But
all right, I'll finish up with a regular question.
Yeah.
I didn't pre-warn you this time, Abby.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
You are at a conference somewhere, and you've got the whole world's new graduate vets listening to you, and you have a couple of minutes to give them one bit of advice about their veterinary careers, or about anything in life, really. What is your one bit of advice to the veterinary community out there? I should have warned you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you should have warned me, because gosh, I feel like I need to say something super inspiring. I think what I'd say is just really try to stick with it and believe in yourself, and just don't let any perceptions or opinions kind of make you think that you can't follow your dreams.
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it.
That's good. Good thinking on your feet.
That was really good.
Abby, thank you so very much for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, guys. It was fun. It was good to chat. Thanks for thinking of me.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.